Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. It's been more than 2 months since my guest, Eli Lake, of the Free Press and host of the Breaking History podcast, authored the podcast Luigi Mangione and the History of Bourgeois Terrorism. So I haven't listened to it in probably 10 weeks, Eli, but it came to mind after Wednesday night's horrific murder of the young Jewish couple at the Capitol Jewish Museum. And that, the murder of the healthcare executive, the attack on Ben Shapiro's house, the Tesla terrorism, 2 assassination attempts on Trump. We've got the attempt to kill Brett Kavanaugh, that not unlike what happened Wednesday night, but it didn't work. I just think, I've said we're not in the 60s forever, but maybe we are. What do you think?
Well, there is a difference, and that is that you needed a real network in the 1960s and 1970s to kind of conduct terrorism. And you don't necessarily need that today because radicalization, as we learned in the war on terror, or towards, I should say, the end of the war on terror, or at least into the war on terror, a few 10 years in, that you can become a walking smart bomb. You can become a radicalized killer by just absorbing things online. You don't need somebody to bring you into a group of people. You don't need to. I mean, if you look at the history of the Weather Underground, um, they had struggle sessions that were modeled in many ways on Stalin's and Mao's, almost kind of the ability to psychologically break down individuals in a group. Um, the new model that you could say was developed by ISIS more than 10 years ago is to simply put out this kind of poison, and somebody will, not everybody who encounters it or who is part of the cause will become a terrorist, but all you need is a few, and that's what we just saw. All right,
Eli, I'm
we
not
don't know
sure
if
if
he
you're
has other
familiar.
connections. Yeah.
Are you familiar with? Oh, no, I hear you perfectly. I don't know if you're familiar with Guy Christensen. He's an 18-year-old TikToker who was interviewed by the World Socialist website and then yesterday put out a TikTok 2 minute, actually, it's a 6 minute hate fest, basically calling on other people to murder other Jews and other Zionists. And he's 18 years old and he's stupid. And I mean, he reveals that he's stupid, but he's very passionate. He's wearing keffiyeh. And I went back and found an interview. I do think radicalization is accelerating, and I don't know how to slow it down. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, there are not a lot of really good options. What we've seen, and we have to grapple with this because I obviously have an interest in slowing the spread of this hate, is that when you empower social media companies with ways to throttle and prevent speech online, that is almost always a power that is abused. So it started off, if you remember, the content moderators at places like Twitter 10 years ago, there wasn't much of a controversy. You couldn't post ISIS and Al Qaeda snuff videos, and I don't think you still can. Then, after the 2016 election, there was a moral panic about Russia, and suddenly there was a push to prevent Russian disinformation. And then, after COVID, there was a push to prevent medical disinformation. And what we saw in all of these cases, and particularly after the 2020 election, were that people who had legitimate points were still caught up in this sort of censorship complex. And so after Elon Musk bought Twitter, many people were sort of brought back. But my concern is that, I don't necessarily trust the speech police, whether at a social media company or, God forbid, the government, as we both know, that would be in many ways getting into First Amendment grounds. So it is a very, very difficult thing. I mean, I don't know, but I guess one thing I would say is that we need to deal with a deeper rot within our education system. What we've seen, if you look at some of these stories about Qatari money that not only goes to universities, it also goes to secondary schools, in some cases, middle schools and earlier, is you have to sort of say, wait a second, the people who are in charge of our broader education, not just our elite education, are pushing a kind of indoctrination. So that's one
You know,
place
you
to look.
worry much more about the Qataris than I do, but both the kingdom and the Qataris gave money to the Nixon Library, and I've always understood that they were the designated home base where everyone could meet. I've never understood them to be actively involved. Let's talk about it during the break and come back on the other. I've never
Yeah,
understood them
sure.
to be actively pushing the Al Qaeda agenda so much as being Ali Ali in free, where the terrorists can sit down with Israel and Netanyahu can do a deal with Hamas. Stay tuned, America. I'm going to talk with Eli during the break. He's coming back on the other side as well. Eli, about the Qataris, I always disclose. I'm on the board of the
Mm,
Nixon Library. We took money from the kingdom. We took money from the Qataris,
mm.
and they're not allowed to influence programming. It's a bright line. You can't have anything. You can build us a building and we'll put your name on it because Nixon opened the embassy there 50 years ago, but you can't have anything to do with programming, and that's fine with them. I, do you think they're trying to run an influence operation on kids about jihadism?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's not. We should always resist mono causes because I don't. I think in some ways they're pushing on open doors when you're talking about the education establishment right now, and some of that's just pure ideological stuff, which is to say that ideas that have been discarded in the broader discourse have really kind of taken hold and are not questioned when you're talking about the institutions that train teachers in our country right now, and these are people who have taken a great deal to sort of push concepts like anti-racism and so forth, which may not seem to have anything to do with Jews, except that when the rubber hits the road on these university campuses, what have we seen? That we have all kinds of rules against microaggressions and all these other groups that can't be offended, except if you're a Jewish student, you say I don't feel safe. And I'm not saying that that comes from nowhere. Now, as for the Qataris, it's vast. I would not. I mean, if I don't think they're necessarily trying to influence the Nixon Center, as you or the Nixon Library, as you say. But what we do know is that the government of Qatar, after October 7th, the prime minister and the foreign ministry basically praised it as a heroic act of resistance. They sounded no different than what you would expect to hear on Al Jazeera, which also the Qataris fund and created. So I am worried about the influence of Qatar, but I also think sometimes it can be overstated. Jay Solomon and Franny Block for the Free Press wrote a really excellent, comprehensive piece of journalism that looked at all of the investments that Qatar has made, which is pretty
Did they
staggering. It's
can
not just
did they can deal? Because I went over and sat down with the
yeah.
ambassador from Qatar, and I've sat down with the ambassador of UAE as well. I'll talk to anybody, but I was told Bibi wanted Qatar to host Hamas.
That's
Is that
there.
true?
Well, first of all, at it's yes and no. Yes, BB after I think it was the 2014 Gaza war. And by the way, the entire international community, starting with the Obama administration, had a conundrum, which is Hamas remains in power in Gaza, and they did not want to say that we're not going to try to reconstruct this area. So it all had to go through Gaza, and there was one country that was certainly willing to deliver that funding. And I think Netanyahu saw this as a way of putting the conflict he was dead wrong on ice. So yes, it's true that Netanyahu kind of supported Qatar kind of stepping in and funding Hamas, and one of the reasons that he supported is because there was really no other country willing to get their hands dirty with Hamas, or more respectable country or more respectable kinds of funds. But obviously, that proved to be a mistake. But it's a fair point to make that
All right,
this
now
was a
pause because we're going
blunder.
to come back on the air. Stand
Okay.
by, Eli. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Eli Lake is the host of the Breaking History podcast. He's a columnist for the Free Press. I think everyone should subscribe to the Free Press, just like I think everyone should subscribe to Commentary because they both defend the West, and there aren't enough publications that are serious and do that. I want to conclude by asking you, Eli, the acceleration of violence alarms me. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Do you think Jews ought to be more afraid than they are right now? Because I'm still astonished that there were not security guards outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum.
Well, fear is a tricky emotion, but the way I see it is that there is inspiration to be gleaned from Jewish history. I think now is a time to study a concept that was developed by Zev Jabotinsky and Menachem Begin called Hadar. And that is a kind of combination of both pride, but honoring a kind of sort of Jewish idea that you are not going to walk through the world kind of, ashamed of your identity, and you're going to be proud of it. And you're also going to learn how to defend yourself. Um, I would say at this point that I don't think, I don't support obviously any kind of vigilante justice, but I do think that you should consider their sort of at least cultural aversion to owning handguns and taking advantage of the Second Amendment at this point. And so that's part of it. I think the other part is that you're going to see it's almost a social tax, but it's also a very real tax on security for Jewish institutions. And events
Yes.
like this, you're right. I mean, and it's deeply unfair. But I mean, I just think that leading the way should be Jewish organizations and Jewish people should sort of say, um, you know what, I don't want to make you feel comfortable. I think this is despicable what you're accusing Israel of, which is a kind of blood libel, which in some cases will inspire these kinds of individuals. We should say we don't know in the case of Elias Rodriguez that whether he worked with someone or not, but I do think that chances are that he was probably somebody who was radicalized like this Aaron Bushnell and
Well, we're going to
others.
find out.
uh,
Now, here's my last
yeah, we're gonna
question.
we're gonna
We don't
find
have
out.
anyone at the
Okay.
UN, and France, England, and Canada are attacking Israel. And this is a time when we
Yeah.
need an ambassador to the UN to stand up in that forum and say, stop. Do you think we have to accelerate or put in priority poll position Michael Waltz's nomination?
I think so. I mean, it's unfortunate that Elise Stefanik, because of the numbers in the House, couldn't do it because I think she would have been terrific. But we need Walls to channel Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Jean Kirkpatrick and the strong American representatives in that nest of vipers.
I think he's got the chops. I mean, he's been in
Yeah, no, I'm not saying he
gunfights
doesn't. I'm
with the
just saying, yeah,
Taliban. Yeah, I think
absolutely.
he
No, no,
can
I
speak
know he
from
has the
experience.
chops. I'm just saying, I know he has the chops, but we need is somebody and I've talked to Mike Walsh before, so I don't want to, I'm not in any way diminishing that. What I'm saying is it's such an important position right now. What you need is a really strong advocate for Western values in that institution.
Amen. And the sooner the better because we're empty. We got an empty chair. And when stuff like what is happening happens, okay, I got time for a bonus question, Eli. I would think
Yes,
Israel has to strike Iran within the next 6 to 8 weeks. I think that has to happen. What do you think?
I do not understand why it hasn't happened yet. My hope is that the Trump administration will cooperate and let Israel take the lead, and then try to handle the diplomatic blowback and possible mid-air refueling and other sorts of things. And I think that there's been a way to sort of make this point to Trump, which is to say the Iranians can always negotiate after you take out these facilities
Good
as
point.
well.
Good point. And I just think it's time, and I want the American people to realize we're out of time,
Absolutely.
and we got to do this. Eli Lake, follow him on X at Eli Lake. Listen to Breaking History. Go back and get the Luigi Mangione and the rise of bourgeois terrorism episode from March 17th. Thank you, Eli.